Hello, and welcome to our first and only video on Unit 1, Period 1, 1491 to 1607. This video is going to focus on initial contact and colonization in the Americas. So here you have a quick overview of Unit 1. You can see these are the topics that College Board has lined out for Unit 1. You'll notice that the very first topic is contextualization of Period 1 from 1491 to 1607, and the last one is causation in Period 1. And this is always going to be true of the first and last topic in every time period that we talk about. The first topic will always be contextualization, and the last topic will always be some sort of thinking skill, causation, continuity and change over time, or comparison. You can see there's quite a few topics in Unit 1, or a few topics in Unit 1. We're not going to look too much at 1.2 and 1.6 today. We're going to talk about those more in class, but we are going to be focusing on topics 1.3, 1.4, and 1.5. So we're going to start off with a question. What motivated European exploration and conquest in the Americas? So that's a pretty complex question with a lot of answers. So we're going to run through some of the big ones pretty quickly. So a couple things to note here, that the motives for European states could vary a lot, and we'll talk about some of those differences in the next video, but we're going to talk about some of the kind of long-reaching ones, the ones that go a little bit further back initially. So all the way back to the 11th, 12th, 13th centuries, the Crusades. Okay, before the Crusades, after the fall of the Roman Empire at the end of the 5th century, Europe was fairly isolated from the rest of the world. Now, the Crusades, which was this attempt on the part of the Europeans led by the Catholic Pope to regain the Holy Land in Jerusalem in the Middle East, this is actually going to serve to not actually achieve its ultimate goal, but it is going to serve to introduce Europeans to Asian luxury goods, to really reawaken this contact with the rest of the world, and allow them to get access for the first time in a long time to trade from the Indian Ocean, from India, from China, from Southeast Asia. So this really reawakens interest in these very, very expensive and highly desirable luxury goods like silks and spices and sometimes fragrant woods, and other sources of mineral wealth. So this is something we see as far back as the 11th and 12th century. So what is actually going to enable European exploration when we get all the way up into the 15th century, which is really what we're talking about, and when we start to see initial European maritime exploration? And that's actually built upon the technology that Europeans borrowed from other places. So particularly Asian and Muslim navigational knowledge, like the compass and the astrolabe. The Portuguese became very, very accomplished shipbuilders. The Portuguese caravel was fast and very navigable. They opened schools of navigation. The Portuguese were, along with the Spanish, some of the very earliest European maritime explorers. So this technology from other countries is definitely going to allow Europeans to make these kind of initial outreaches to other parts of the world in the 15th century. On top of this, we're starting to see some political consolidation in Spain. Spain had initially been several different kingdoms, but by the late 15th century, it consolidated two of its largest kingdoms under Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, and becomes essentially what we think of as the modern country of Spain today. Ferdinand and Isabella are going to spend the first couple of decades of their reign attempting successfully to force out non-Christians, non-Catholics, the Jews and the Muslims. This was called the Reconquista, and it ended in around 1491, which might seem sort of significant if you remember that old tune from elementary school. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So after the Reconquista, they are really going to turn outwards. Now, the side effect of the Reconquista, of course, is there was a great deal of hostility towards Muslims on the part of the Spanish. And why this is particularly significant is that the trade routes through the Mediterranean were mostly controlled by the Italians and the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire, of course, were Muslim. So essentially, there was a middleman who controlled the land routes and the Mediterranean sea routes to Asian luxury goods. Ferdinand and Isabella wanted to try to go around them. So That made them fairly receptive to Columbus when he came to them and had this idea to sail west to reach Asia. And they didn't have to risk a whole bunch. It was just a ship to outfit. And, if it didn't work out, no harm, no foul for this Spanish crown. But if it did work out, it could mean a lot of money for them. And that's, of course, what actually happened. Additionally, for other countries, around the same time, not much later than this, we see the beginnings of the Protestant Reformation. It starts in Germany with Martin Luther. This Protestant Reformation is going to be a breaking away of Protestants from the Catholic Church and forming new sects of new denominations of Christianity. So these new denominations of Christians were not always welcome in some of the European countries, and it did motivate some people to seek settlement ultimately, really more beginning in the 17th century and 18th centuries in the Americas. Additionally, the Catholic Church is going to respond to the Protestant Reformation. They lost many followers in Europe, and part of their response was to try to gain converts elsewhere. And what better place for this than the newly opened colonies in the Americas? So they're really going to see a real Catholic missionary zeal and drive on the part of the remaining Catholic countries like Spain and France. This is going to be a very powerful motivator for colonization, and it's going to dovetail really nicely because even though many of the states, the kings and queens, and the monarchs wanted to gain new lands to enrich themselves through tax revenue and prestige and power, it was really great for them to have a justification, a religious justification to say, oh no, we're going to bring, Christianity to the native peoples there. So this was often used as a justification for colonization as well. So a little side note here we're going to talk about really briefly. I call this the training grounds for the Americas. The Portuguese, like I said, were some of the earliest explorers. And though they didn't control a very large amount of land or a large empire in the Americas outside of Brazil, they did have they did do quite a bit of exploration around the coast of Africa. So the Portuguese actually established a trading post empire in the Indian Ocean. But one of the earliest places that they conquered were the Azores Islands in the Atlantic. And what they did there basically served as a model that many countries replicated in the Americas and in other places. They created sugar plantations there. Sugar was highly desirable, worth a lot of money. Many people wanted sugar in their food. There was a great demand for it in Europe and across the world. What they found really quickly were the indigenous peoples on the Azores Islands died of disease. They hadn't been exposed to many European pathogens because they'd been fairly isolated until Portuguese contact. They died fairly quickly when exposed to European disease. So what do the Portuguese do? They begin to import African slaves for labor. And this is going to be something that we see as a pattern that occurs again in the Americas as well in the following centuries. Okay, next question. How did European contact with the Americas impact both the Old and New Worlds? And this leads us to a discussion of the Columbian Exchange. And if you took world history last year, you may recall a discussion of this. So the Columbian Exchange was the biological exchange between the Old and New Worlds, Afro-Eurasia and the Americas. This biological exchange included crops and diseases and people and animals. Crops going from the Americas to Europe. There's quite a few crops that went from the Americas to Europe. It definitely contributed to the population growth in Afro-Eurasia. It saw a really pretty big boom in the 17th and 18th centuries because of these very hardy American crops like potatoes and squash and corn and beans. So this is going to allow for better nutrition, higher calorie foods like potato replace the kind of bread as a staple of the diet. So this is where we're going to see really big population growths in much of Asia and Europe. And of course, in addition to this, there's also going to be new sources of mineral wealth in the Americas, in Europe, as silver and gold from the Americas ends up in Europe. And this is actually going to fuel a growing middle class in Europe. It also is going to fuel a shift from feudalism to capitalism. In feudalism, we have these very fixed orders of society, very limited social mobility, a barter economy, no money for exchange. In capitalistic system, it allows more people to rise in society beyond just royals and nobility. It introduces a market economy, and money is used for exchange. Disease is probably the number one biggest impact to the Americas and the native peoples from Europe. Disease brought by Europeans were absolutely devastating to native peoples. As I mentioned with the Azores Islands, native peoples had been in relative isolation from Europeans, from Afro-Eurasia in general, for millennia. And because of this isolation, they had no immunity to diseases like measles and the smallpox. So it was very, very, very deadly to them. And there was a huge dying off of indigenous peoples. Europeans, incidentally, often saw this as a sign of favor from God for their conquest of the native peoples. But you can see in this graph right here, between 1518 and 1593, a massive, massive estimated loss of populations. And this is for Mexico, but we see something similar all across the Americas, anywhere native peoples come into contact with Europeans. The exchange of animals and people from Europe to the Americas. There were very few domesticated animals in the Americas. Most of the larger animals had been hunted to extinction thousands and thousands and thousands of years before Europeans came to the Americas. The biggest domesticated animals in the Americas were the llama and the turkey. So when Europeans came, they often brought their animals with them, and this could be good and bad. For the Plains Indians, for example, this proved to be relatively helpful. In fact, many of them shifted away from agriculture with the introduction of the horse from the Spanish. With the introduction of the horse, it was possible for them to hunt bison more efficiently. So they actually switched from settled agricultural lifestyles to hunting lifestyles. In other cases, it was much more difficult. For example, pigs were a real problem in much of the Americas. A lot of Native American societies, most Native American societies, had often communal lands or did not fence off their agricultural lands, but pigs were an issue. Pigs would get into those lands and eat the agricultural crops. And it forced the beginning of this fencing off of agricultural lands and this real switch and emphasis to private property, which was also a really strong notion in Europe. Okay, next question. What did the Spanish conquest look like in the Americas? And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in the next video also, but just a quick initial discussion. The Spanish were really the first Europeans, at least in the 15th century, to reach the Americas. You may have heard stories about how the Vikings got to the Americas first, and that's absolutely true. In the 10th century, 11th century, they were establishing settlements or at least trade relationships with people in Newfoundland. But for the purposes of our course, we're really going to start talking with the Spanish in the 15th century, late 15th, early 16th century. When the Spanish get there, they establish pretty quickly a system called the encomienda system. All right, the king and queen of Spain wanted to be able to tax and gather new sources of wealth from the Americas. How do they do this? They have to encourage Europeans to go and settle there. And they did this, enticing people by the offer of grants of land. The encomienda system was a system in which the Spanish king and queen gave away land that, yes, belonged to native peoples and the natives that lived on that land to the Spanish conquerors. They gave them this forced, coerced labor system. But as we've discussed, this doesn't work out well at all for Native Americans because of the Great Dying. The rampant disease that we see when they come in contact with the Europeans was not only devastating to Native American communities, but it made them pretty poor laborers for the Europeans because they died off really quickly. And as we saw in the Azores Island, we do see fairly quickly by the 17th century the beginnings of a huge amount of forced migration of enslaved persons from Africa, especially the west coast of Africa. So this is something we'll talk more about later on. One last thing I wanted to talk about a little bit that our AP curriculum talks about is the Spanish Sociedad de Castas, the caste system that develops in Spain. So miscegenation was very common in the Spanish colonial region in Latin America, in what we would think of today as Central and South America. When I say miscegenation, I mean racial mixing. And this often happened in different ways. Most of the conquistadors were male. Very few European women came over, especially initially. And so many of them either A, took wives among native peoples, or there was a great deal of sexual exploitation and rape as well. So as a result of this, we see a lot of children born that are racially mixed. And what we see ending up occurring in this Spanish system is a race-based caste hierarchy, the vestiges of which you can still see even in modern-day Latin America to some extent. But it was hierarchical. And this is sort of the way it worked. The Peninsulares were at the top. They were the government. Now, the Peninsulares were people who were from the Iberian Peninsula. These were Spanish people who were born in Spain, and they came to the Americas often not permanently, but often for a period of a few years to take on governorships or ruling positions. They dominated the political sphere in the Americas. Right underneath the Peninsulares were Creoles. Creoles were Europeans as well, but they were born in the Americas. That is what distinguished them from the Peninsulares. Creoles were people who were settled permanently there. They married other Europeans, other Spanish. They were considered pure Spanish, and they lived in the Americas, and they tended to dominate the economy. They owned the plantations, they owned the mines and the sources of wealth. Underneath that, you would have the mestizos, and the mestizos is a fairly broad category that could refer to any mixed person, anyone who is Indian and European, Indian and African, or even African and European. So a great deal of people fell into this category of mestizos. And the social position of mestizos could vary immensely. Mestizos could be fairly wealthy. They could own land. They would never have the social status of Creoles or Peninsulares, but they could be fairly wealthy or well respected, or they could be fairly low in the social ladder if they had no land or no wealth. And then at the bottom, we see pure-blooded Indians, American Indians, and African slaves. And they would be at the bottom of this Spanish system. So as I said, it was a race-based hierarchy in the Spanish colonial system. So that's going to do it for us today for Unit 1, 1491 to 1607. We'll be coming up soon on our next video to start us off in Unit 2, which will cover the period of 1607 to 1754.